So we're talking about the 2000 playoff sudden death mini game between the Kansas City Wizards and the LA Galaxy. If you listen to the MLS history episode from last week, then you'll have heard me talk about the 2000 KC Wizards season, where, spoiler alert, they did the double Supporter Shield and MLS Cup. So sorry if it kind of gave away the result of this sudden death mini game, but we did briefly cover it last time. However, I will go into a bit more detail specifically about the sudden death minigame today, rather than the whole season. So if you want to hear about the whole season, go check out our last episode. If you just want to hear about the sudden death minigame, then listen in. As always, source for this one, I used a little bit of Wikipedia, and there was a great podcast on this one from the Final Whistle podcast, which I think is a SKC type podcast where they spoke about this game in particular, the sudden death minigame. So good anecdotes in here that I'll mention, and shout out to them for this great for the information on this one. So if you didn't listen to the last episode, I'll give you a little mention or tune up on the playoff format for this season's playoffs. So this is a best of 3 series where it was scored as 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, similar to the regular season. And first team to get 5 points would move on to the next round. So one of the issues with the 2000 playoff season is that they got rid of the penalty shootout after each game if it was tied. So the playoff format that is in place would work previously because there wouldn't be any draws. You would play, if it was tied after 90, you would go into a penalty shootout, and ultimately a winner would be decided. In 2000, they got rid of that. So now there are draws. So you could potentially get into a situation where typically it's a best of 3 series. However, you could get a situation where you draw all 3 games. Or maybe you get into a situation where one team wins one game, one team wins another game. In this case, it was the it was a draw in the first game between the Galaxy and the Wiz. It was 0-0, an absolute barn burner of a match. However, the second game would be a little bit better. Second game at the Rose Bowl, the LA Galaxy would win this one 2-1 after an extra time golden goal from Daniel Califf. So this would set up a winner go home for the KC Wiz. However, if they were to win the game, then it would set up this sudden death minigame, which is what we're talking about today. So I'm sure you could put the pieces together. In the third game, sorry, let me take it a step back. I want to talk a little bit about the teams before we dive into the third game and ultimately the sudden death minigame. So the Galaxy and the KC Wiz had a pretty good rivalry at this point. These two teams did not like each other. And so Final Whistle was talking a little bit about this, and they were able to get a quote from Peter Vermees, who was playing for the KC Wiz at this time, who mentioned that before the third game at Arrowhead Stadium, which is where I am right now live, Vermees said that Kobe Jones had walked by the KC Wiz locker room ahead of the game and yelled something into the KC's locker room, something to the effect of, "We're going to kick your PG butt," which Vermees said really fired up the team even more than the already sort of rivalry between the two teams. So you could argue that was a big mistake from Kobe Jones and that it only fueled the Wiz to win this game even more. And win the game they did. So let's get into the game, and then we'll get into the sudden death. So it wasn't a very high-scoring game, which is pretty fitting for these two teams. These two were easily the best 2 defensive teams in the league this season, with the KC Wiz. Let me get my numbers right on this. Where is it? I don't think I have the numbers on me. But the KC Wiz, I want to say, was maybe 29 goals they conceded that season. And the Galaxy may have conceded, I think, 37, somewhere around that range. And then the next highest after that was like in the 50s. So these two were far and away the best defensive teams in the league that season, with SKC honestly being one of the best defensive teams of all time. So with little surprise, the third game between the two of them would end up being a 1-0 win for the KC Wiz. A lot of defensive work, with the lone goal being a penalty from Miklos Molnar. And if you don't know about Miklos Molnar, again, listen to the episode last week, and we talk a little bit more about him. But he was a hugely crucial player for the KC Wiz in this whole playoff, and will continue to be crucial for them. Wink, wink, going forward. So one thing I did want to touch upon for the goal itself in the before the sudden death minigame, it was a penalty scored by Molnar, and the penalty was conceded by Daniel Califf. If you remember that was the one that scored the golden goal to set up this situation anyway, to give Galaxy the advantage going into the third game. And the bad luck for him wouldn't stop there. So let's get into the sudden death mini game. Sorry. So we're tied right now in total points. Man, I'm all over the place for this episode. We're tied right now. We're tied right now, with the first game being a draw, the Galaxy getting a win in the second game, and the KC Wiz getting a win in the third game. So in this situation, considering it is supposed to be best of 3, they had to do a sudden death mini game. And Final Whistle was talking about this game a little bit here. And it felt like MLS was not ready for a situation like this. As I mentioned before, they took out the penalty shootouts, and this, I believe, was the first playoff year without them. So they weren't really prepared for a situation like this. And it showed in the fact that Final Whistle had mentioned that when the game was live, the announcers didn't even know what to call this. I think people have somewhat settled on it being the sudden death minigame, but it went by a number of names during the actual broadcast of the game. So really nobody kind of had an idea of what exactly was going to happen here now that the two teams were tied after a best of 3. So let's get into the sudden death minigame here. It would not take long for the KC Wiz to get a result and end this game and win the series. It took about 6 minutes into the sudden death minigame where Mo Johnston sacrifices his body to win the ball against Daniel Califf, again mentioned, which ultimately led to the game-winning goal by who else but Miklos Molnar, the guy that was incredibly clutch for the KC Wiz. And now I just mentioned that Mo Johnston sacrificed his body to win the ball from Daniel Califf. Final Whistle was talking about this one a little bit too. But as a result of the challenge that Johnston went into to win that ball, which ultimately won them the game, and you could argue ultimately won them MLS Cup, he had to get 13 stitches from taking a cleat from Califf, I believe, to the face. But I'm sure Mo Johnston would argue that was well worth it, considering it ended up in the game-winning goal. Not only that, Mo Johnston, with the 13 stitches, then went on to play MLS Cup final, which was not far after it. So I mean, hats off to Mo Johnston. Talk about grit and determination to continue to play while having 13 stitches is insane. And apparently there's a picture of his bloodied up face from the challenge hung up in the Budweiser Brewhouse at Children's Mercy Park, which is sick. And I would love to see that someday, and I hope to do. But I think if you want, you can Google the picture and you should be able to find it. It's a really great picture. And really, I feel like shows the grit from this KC Wiz team to be able to come back from the deficit and ultimately take down the Galaxy. And as I mentioned in the last episode, but I'll give a quick reminder here. After winning this game, the Wiz would go on to defeat the Chicago Fire in the MLS Cup final and would take home the Shield Cup double season, making this one of the best MLS seasons of all time.
Remember when you made fun of me because words were hard, and now you can't talk.
I don't know what my notes were. They're just like all over the place. I didn't structure my notes very well. Let's say that.
Karma's really fun. I love it.
That's
Um,
okay. Nobody listens to our MLS history episodes anyway.
wow, the disrespect. It's almost like if somebody were to share it and show other people what we were
Ah,
doing.
yeah. That's it. That's it. You're right. You're right.
we need to uh we need to get on a DP Pod away days tour and just go see all the stadiums we haven't seen yet and try and get in and see some of those really cool areas. Catch
Yeah.
that picture.
Are you funding this trip?
You're the one with the job.
You had a job. I
Yeah,
remember.
$500 a year.
That's all right. You lived in Kentucky. It probably cost $1 a year to live there.
Kentucky was way more expensive than here. Bad. Anyways, super cool. Really love that. Again, unique, right? When we were in the early stages of trying to make this league, enjoyable and watchable, you had to do crazy things, and this was one of them. The three-legged. I wonder what happens maybe this year with the third leg or the three-legged or the best of three series for round one. Will we see another sudden death minigame? Will this no longer be the only sudden death minigame?
Eh, hopefully it is. I mean, I think that's part of the novelty is it's the only one in history, and hopefully will continue to be the only one in history.
Yeah, here's hoping, but you never know. Daddy Don, dude's out there, so you never know. Went to Oneonta for gosh sakes, you know what happened to the kids over there?
Oh, yeah,
It's
unfortunately.
crazy.